Most people think they understand their rights inside their own home until the moment those rights are actually tested. For years, something was happening quietly across the United States that almost no one noticed. Police officers were entering private homes without warrants and leaving with legally owned firearms, all under a justification that sounded harmless on the surface but carried serious consequences. Then, without warning, the Supreme Court stepped in and shut it down completely. Not a 5-4 decision, not even 6-3. This was a full 9-0 unanimous ruling. Every single justice agreed. That alone should make you pause and ask, what was happening that forced total agreement in a court that rarely agrees on anything? And more importantly, what change that now directly affects what happens if police show up at your door tomorrow? Because this ruling didn't just adjust a legal standard, it drew a hard constitutional line at the entrance of your home. And what it protects is far more powerful than most people realize. Hi, I'm Timothy, and I break down the legal decisions that actually impact your life in the real world. Not in theory, not in textbooks, but in the exact situations you could find yourself in without warning. And what we're discussing today is one of those decisions. This isn't just about gun ownership, and it isn't just about police procedure. It's about where those two collide, right at your front door, where your rights matter most. Once you understand what the Supreme Court said here, you'll start seeing everyday situations very differently, whether it's a wellness check, a concerned neighbor, or a late-night knock that seems routine at first. And the story behind this ruling, the moment that set everything in motion, is something you need to hear in full, because it began in an ordinary home on an ordinary night, with a situation that escalated in a way no one expected. It started the way many serious situations do. Inside a home, behind closed doors, where no one anticipates a legal battle that could reach the highest court in the country. A husband and wife in Rhode Island were in the middle of a heated argument. Emotions were high, tensions escalated, and in the middle of it, the husband did something that would later become central to a Supreme Court case. He retrieved one of his legally owned firearms, brought it into the room, placed it on the table, and made a dramatic, emotionally charged statement, essentially telling his wife to go ahead and use it. It was a moment of frustration, not violence. No shots were fired, and no one was physically harmed. But the impact didn't end there. His wife, shaken, chose to leave the house, stay elsewhere for the night, and contact the police the next morning. When officers arrived, they weren't responding to a crime scene. They were conducting a welfare check. They spoke with him, assessed the situation, and everything appeared relatively calm. But then the conversation shifted. Officers suggested he go to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, presenting it as voluntary and cooperative. Something simple that would resolve the situation. Trusting that process, he agreed. He left willingly, got into an ambulance, and went to the hospital, believing everything at home would remain as he left it. But while he was at the hospital, doing exactly what officers had asked, something else was happening back at his house. Those same officers returned. This time, they didn't ask permission. They didn't go to a judge. They didn't obtain a warrant. They entered his home and conducted a search. When they found his firearms, they took them. No court approval, no immediate emergency unfolding. Just a decision they believed they were allowed to make. When he was released, not charged with any crime and not deemed a danger, he returned home expecting normalcy, but instead found his firearms gone. When he asked for them back, he was told they couldn't be returned. That's the moment this stopped being a domestic issue and became something much bigger. Because now the question wasn't about an argument or a welfare check. It was about whether the government can enter your home without a warrant and take your property, even when you've cooperated, even when no crime has been committed, and even when a judge was never involved. And once that question is raised, it doesn't just apply to one person, it applies to everyone. That's when he decided to fight back, not just to recover his property, but to challenge how it was taken. From his perspective, it was simple. No warrant, no judge, no crime. Yet the government still entered his home and seized his legally owned firearms. So he filed a lawsuit arguing that his Fourth Amendment rights had been violated. In plain terms, that amendment says the government cannot enter your home and take your property without following a legal process first. That process is not a formality. It's the barrier between authority and overreach. And what makes this case so relevant is how ordinary the situation was. There was no raid, no active criminal investigation, no immediate danger. In fact, the key detail is that he cooperated, and that's exactly when his rights were bypassed. That raises a question most people never consider until it's too late. If this can happen in a situation like that, what prevents it from happening to you? A concerned neighbor? A misunderstanding? A tense moment reported out of context? This is where the real weight of the case lies. And that's why it didn't stay local. It moved through the courts, gaining national attention, because the answer would shape what police are allowed to do inside homes across the country. The justification police used is what made this case so significant. They didn't claim a crime was being investigated or that immediate danger existed. Instead, they relied on something called the community caretaking exception. On the surface, it sounds reasonable, even reassuring. The idea came from an older Supreme Court case involving vehicles, where officers were given flexibility to deal with cars posing safety issues on public roads. In that context, it made sense. But over time, that idea expanded far beyond its original scope. Police departments began applying the same logic to homes, arguing that if they were acting in the interest of safety, checking on well-being, or preventing potential harm, they should be allowed to enter without a warrant. And once that expansion began, it didn't stay limited. It became a justification used in wellness checks, domestic calls, neighbor reports, and mental health concerns. In many cases, firearms were taken, not because a judge ordered it, but because an officer made a decision in the moment. This wasn't widely discussed, but it was happening consistently. A quiet expansion of authority into the most private space people have. Their homes. By the time the Supreme Court took up the case, it wasn't just about one incident. It was about a pattern that had spread across the country. Similar situations were occurring in different states, all tied to the same idea. A wellness check becomes a home entry. A conversation turns into a search. Concern turns into property being taken, all without a warrant or immediate emergency. The question before the court was simple but powerful. Can this community caretaking exception apply inside the home? And when the decision came down, it was clear and unanimous. The answer was no. The court drew a firm distinction between vehicles and homes. A car is mobile and exposed. A home is private and protected at the highest level. Allowing warrantless entry under a vague idea of caretaking, the court said, would erase the line the Fourth Amendment was designed to draw. So they reinforced that line, clearly and decisively. Police cannot enter a home without a warrant unless there is a true, immediate emergency under established exceptions. No new, vague category can be created to bypass the Constitution. What this means in real life is straightforward but powerful. If police knock on your door, even for a welfare check, you are not required to let them in. You can speak with them, acknowledge them, even step outside, but entry into your home requires either your consent or a warrant unless there is an actual emergency happening in that moment. And consent matters more than most people realize. Once you give it, the situation changes immediately. What the court made clear is that good intentions or general concern do not replace constitutional requirements. So, if you ever find yourself in that situation, your response can be calm and simple. You do not consent to entry without a warrant. No confrontation, no escalation, just clarity. At a broader level, this ruling sends a strong message across the country. If firearms are going to be taken from a home, there must be a legal process. A judge must be involved. Evidence must be presented. It cannot be based solely on a momentary decision unless there is a true emergency. It also opens the door for past cases to be re-examined, though not automatically. Legal action is still required. And it's important to understand what this ruling does not do. It does not eliminate emergency exceptions, and it does not invalidate red flag laws that involve court orders. What it does is shut down shortcuts, making it clear that process, not discretion, is what the Constitution requires inside your home. In the end, this decision is about more than one case. It's about drawing a line that had slowly begun to blur over time. Rights don't usually disappear all at once. They erode gradually through small exceptions and reasonable-sounding justifications. What the court did here was stop that drift and reassert a boundary. But that boundary only matters if you understand it. Because in the moment when it counts, when there's a knock at your door, you won't be thinking about court cases. You'll be relying on what you already know. And once you understand where that line is, everything changes.